For Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. The death toll from a weekend Russian missile strike on an apartment building in Dnipro, Ukraine, has climbed to 44. The victims of the deadliest attack on civilians this year included 5 children. 20 people remain missing, but officials have ended their search and rescue efforts. Authorities say 79 people were injured, including 16 children, and 44 people were rescued. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for more arms.
Can Russian terror be stopped? Yes. It is possible to do it somehow differently than on the battlefield in Ukraine? Unfortunately, no. It can and must be done on our land, in our sky, and on our seas. What is needed for this? Those weapons which are in the depots of our partners and which our soldiers are waiting for so much.
Meanwhile, Russian soldiers appear to have nearly surrounded the city of Bakhmut, which Ukrainian soldiers have been fighting to retain control of. This soldier spoke to Al Jazeera amidst shelling and firing in the background.
When we talk about the direction of Bakhmut, we're talking about the whole front line. They're trying to get into the city from every direction, from the north, from the east, and the south.
Ukraine's First Lady scolded world leaders and corporate executives at the World Economic Forum's annual gathering in Switzerland for not using all their influence to support Ukraine and stop Russia's war. As the anniversary of the war nears, Olena Zelensky spoke amid panels on everything from global recession to climate change.
What will happen to inflation when state borders start to collapse and the integrity of countries is trampled on by those who want it? How can the world combat climate change if it hasn't even stopped the burning of entire cities in Ukraine? This is what Russia is doing with its artillery, with its missiles, with its Iranian drones. And you know, the Russian aggression was never intended to restrict itself to the Ukrainian borders. This war could go further.
Olena Zelensky. Anti-poverty group Oxfam says companies making big profits as inflation surges should face windfall taxes to help cut global inequality. It's one of the recommendations in a report released ahead of the World Economic Forum. It says over the past 2 years, the world's super rich 1% have gained nearly twice as much wealth as the remaining 99% combined. President Joe Biden is set to host Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte for talks. The U.S. administration is looking to persuade the Netherlands to further limit China's access to advanced semiconductors with export restrictions. The talks are also expected to cover the country's efforts to thwart Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine in an upcoming democracy summit. An estimated 100,000 Israelis protested the country's new ultra-conservative government over the weekend in the rain, some defiantly waving Palestinian flags in response to a new law that bans waving the flag in public, calling it a symbol of terrorism. The actions come as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's ruling coalition of Orthodox, Zionist, and anti-gay lawmakers have imposed a series of measures against the Palestinian Authority and its people, including a moratorium on Palestinian construction in the West Bank, where Israel wants to increase Jewish settlements. It's also revoked travel cards for some Palestinian officials, including its foreign minister, restricting his movement in and around the occupied West Bank. Human rights group Amnesty International says the actions are designed to silence dissent and restrict protests. On Martin Luther King Jr. Day, civil rights leaders announced the 60th anniversary March on Washington will take place August 28th at the nation's capital. Here's the Reverend Al Sharpton.
When we've seen hate crimes and hate at a higher level than we've seen in many years, which is why we have called on our Jewish leaders and our Latino ex-leaders and our Asian leaders and LGBTQ and Native American leaders to join with us in Washington this year for the 60th anniversary to march against hate, to march against homophobia, anti-Semitism, xenophobia. We need to go back to Lincoln Memorial in the footsteps of Dr. King and stand up against hate together.
10 leading economic organizations also launched a national campaign called Full Employment for All, calling for a federal program for subsidized employment targeted towards communities that face high rates of unemployment, even during periods when the national unemployment rate is low. largely communities of color. Algernon Austin is Director for Race and Economic Justice at the Center for Economic Policy Research.
Martin Luther King, in his last year of his life, he's working on a poor people's campaign and very much concerned about the issue of poverty in the United States. One thing that Dr. King and Coretta Scott King advocated for was for a federal jobs program. So the federal government would subsidize employment, and this could be public sector employment. It could also support employment in the nonprofit sector or the for-profit sector. The goal is job creation in these communities that have been left behind.
He says similar programs have occurred before at the state level and also federal level, most notably during FDR's New Deal in the 1930s. I'm Christina Onnested, reporting for Pacifica Radio.